The iron shackles bit into Eliza Harper's wrists as the Comanche warriors dragged her across the sun-scorched Texas plain, the metallic scent of her own blood mingling with the dust kicked up by unshod hooves. 16 years old, she had been gathering wildflowers along the Brazos when the raid struck her family's homestead. One moment she was humming a hymn her mother taught her, the next, arrows hissed through the air like vengeful hornets. Her father fell first, clutching the Bible he'd been reading aloud. Her mother's scream cut short. Eliza remembered only the thunder of horses and the warrior's hand clamping over her mouth, his breath hot against her ear as he whispered words she couldn't understand but instinctively knew meant ownership. They rode for 3 days without rest. Eliza's world narrowed to the rhythm of the pony's gait and the ache in her bones. At night, the warriors built no fire. They spoke in low guttural tones around her, their faces painted black and red, eyes reflecting starlight like polished obsidian. She learned the leader's name only when the others deferred to him with a dip of their heads, Tahit, which the Mexican captives later translated as, "he who walks through fire." The most feared Comanche war chief on the staked plains, they said. His name alone made seasoned ranchers cross themselves. When they reached the main encampment, a sprawling city of hide teepees stretching along a cottonwood-lined creek, the women ululated in victory. Children darted between the horses, waving scalp locks still dripping. Eliza was shoved forward, stumbling over a child's wooden hoop. An old woman with a face like carved sandstone caught her before she fell, muttering something that might have been pity. They stripped Eliza of her calico dress, replacing it with a doeskin shift that smelled of smoke and sage. Her blonde hair, once braided neatly for Sunday service, was hacked short with a flint knife. The physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation of standing naked before strangers who examined her teeth and limbs as if she were livestock. That night, the council decided her fate. The captives who understood both languages translated in halting whispers, Tahit needed a new wife. His last had died birthing a stillborn son the previous winter, and the band believed bad spirits clung to a man without a woman's balance. Eliza's youth and fair skin marked her as valuable, a living trophy that would elevate Tahit's status further. Refusal meant death, or worse, being passed among the warriors until nothing remained of the girl who once dreamed of teaching school. The wedding ceremony unfolded at dawn. Eliza was painted with red clay symbols across her cheeks and breasts, symbols the old woman said meant new life from captured earth. Tahit appeared bare-chested, his muscular torso latticed with scars that told stories of cougar claws and Mexican lances. A single eagle feather dangled from his braided hair. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers only once before the medicine man began chanting. The pipe passed from hand to hand, the smoke burned Eliza's lungs when they forced her to inhale. Drums pounded like a second heartbeat. When Tahit tied a beaded thong around her wrist, binding it to his own, the knot felt like the closing of a coffin lid. The wedding gift came at the ceremony's end. Custom demanded the groom present something of great value to prove his worthiness. The crowd parted. 2 warriors led forward a magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming like midnight water. A collective gasp rose, even Eliza, numb with terror, recognized the horse. It was Diablo, her father's prized Andalusian, stolen during the raid. The brand on its flank, the Harper H entwined with a cross, was unmistakable. Tahit placed the reins in her trembling hands. Through the Mexican interpreter, he spoke his first words directly to her, "This horse carried your blood. Now it carries mine. We are one circle." The gesture should have been triumph, a final erasure of her past. Instead, something fractured inside Eliza's chest. Diablo nuzzled her shoulder, nickering softly, and for the first time since the raid, tears spilled hot down her painted cheeks. The Comanche women cooed, mistaking grief for joy. Only Tahit saw the truth. His fingers brushed the moisture from her chin with surprising gentleness before he turned away. Life in the teepee began at sunrise. Eliza, renamed Mahi, captured Moon, learned quickly that survival required observation. Tahiti's first wife had left behind a motherless daughter, Nava, a solemn child of 4 with her father's sharp cheekbones. The girl watched Eliza with huge wary eyes, clutching a rag doll stuffed with buffalo hair. Feeding the child became Eliza's first act of defiance against despair. She mashed roasted camas root with dried berries when the band's hunters returned empty-handed after a blizzard. Nava's tentative smile, offered over a tin cup of weak coffee, was the first crack in the wall Eliza built around her heart. Winter clamped down like a wolf's jaws. The band followed the buffalo south, living in skin lodges that flapped like wounded birds in the wind. Eliza learned to scrape hides until her hands bled, to sew quills into intricate patterns under the tutelage of Tahiti's sister, Pahayoko. The Comanche women spoke little English, but gestures bridged gaps. When Eliza's monthly bleeding came, Pahayoko showed her the Moon Lodge, a separate teepee where women retreated. There, surrounded by steaming willow bark tea and stories told in melodic cadence, Eliza felt the first stirrings of belonging that had nothing to do with captivity. Tahiti himself remained an enigma. He spoke to her rarely, and then only in commands: hold the lance steady, during riding lessons, sing to the horse so he remembers your voice, when Diablo shied at thunder. Yet at night, when the teepee fire burned low, he sometimes traced the scar on her wrist where the shackle had rubbed raw. His touch was clinical, almost curious, as if mapping damage. Eliza lay rigid, waiting for violation that never came. Weeks turned to months. The marriage remained unconsummated, a fact that fueled camp gossip. Some said Tahiti feared her white magic, others claimed he mourned his dead wife too deeply. Eliza, raised on Bible verses about marital duty, felt only confusion and a strange, guilty relief. Spring brought the first raid since her capture. Tahiti returned with a bullet graze along his ribs and a string of fresh horses. Among the new captives was a Mexican boy, no older than 12, his face swollen from beatings. The boy spoke Spanish. Eliza's schoolhouse lessons rushed back. Through him, she learned the Comanche planned to trade the boy to the Kiowa for guns. The child wept when they tied him to a stake outside the medicine lodge, his cries thin as a wounded bird's. That night, Eliza dreamed of her mother's kitchen, the smell of cornbread and the scratch of her father's beard when he kissed her goodnight. She woke with the taste of ash. Tahiti was already gone, checking the horse herd. Moonlight silvered the teepee walls. Eliza stared at the rawhide rope binding the Mexican boy's ankles, visible through the lodge flap. Something inside her, long dormant, stirred like a seed cracking open. She waited until the camp slept. Wrapping herself in Tahiti's spare buffalo robe, she slipped outside. The boy's eyes widened when she knelt beside him, finger to lips. The knot was tight, her fingers, calloused from months of labor, worked slowly. Tranquilo, she whispered, the Spanish word for calm rising unbidden. When the rope fell away, the boy clutched her hand so hard she felt bones grind. They made it to the horse pickets before discovery. Diablo nickered softly as Eliza looped a hackamore over his head. She boosted the boy up first, then swung behind him. The camp dogs began barking. Hooves thundered, Tahiti and 3 warriors appearing like specters from the darkness. For one heartbeat, Eliza met her husband's eyes across the firelight. In them, she saw not rage but something rawer, betrayal, perhaps, or recognition of a line crossed. She kicked Diablo's flanks. The stallion surged forward, leaping the low brush corral. Arrows whistled past. One grazed Eliza's shoulder, hot as a branding iron. The boy clung to the mane, sobbing prayers in Spanish. Behind them, Tahiti's voice rose in a single command that halted the pursuit. Eliza didn't look back. The plain swallowed them, starlit and endless. They rode until Diablo's sides heaved like bellows. Dawn found them in a cedar brake, the boy trembling with fever from an infected cut. Eliza tore strips from her shift to bind the wound, singing the only lullaby she knew, her mother's voice echoing in her own. When the boy finally slept, she allowed herself one luxury. She wept for the girl who had gathered wildflowers, for the father who would never again read psalms by lamplight, for the husband whose touch had never demanded more than silence. 3 days later, Texas. The letter came on a Tuesday, delivered by a grizzled army scout who refused to meet Eliza's eyes. The envelope was doeskin, soft as butter, sealed with red wax impressed by a thumbprint. Inside, a single eagle feather and a strip of beaded rawhide, the same pattern Tahit had tied around her wrist on their wedding day. No words. The scout muttered something about a Comanche runner leaving it at Fort Belknap before vanishing into the prairie. Eliza was 17 now, taller, her sun-bleached hair grown past her shoulders again. The speaking circuit had ended, audiences grew bored with tales of captivity once the novelty wore thin. She worked as a seamstress in her aunt's shop, fingers nimble with needle and thread, stitching wedding gowns for girls who would never know the weight of a war chief's gaze. The feather trembled in her hand. She should burn it. Instead, she tucked it into the Bible her father had carried, between the pages of Ruth, a foreigner who found home among strangers. Summer brought drought. Wells failed, cattle died standing in cracked mud. Rumors drifted in with dust devils, the Comanche were starving. Buffalo herds, once darkening the horizon, had been slaughtered by white hunters selling tongues for pennies. Tahit's band, pushed north by army patrols, faced winter with empty bellies. Eliza heard the stories and felt them like stones in her own stomach. One September evening, a Kiowa trader arrived at the fort with horses to sell. Eliza, delivering mended uniforms, overheard him speaking to the commander in broken English. Tahit's woman, she run. Now his daughter sick. No medicine. He send this. The trader held up a tiny moccasin, child-sized, quilled with blue jay feathers. Nava's work, Eliza recognized the pattern she herself had taught the girl during long winter nights. That night, Eliza packed a saddlebag with quinine, canned milk, the last of her aunt's willow bark. She left a note, debt must be paid in the currency it was given. Diablo, stabled behind the shop, nickered when she led him out bareback as she'd learned on the plains. The gate guard, half in love with the famous captive girl, let her pass without question. She rode west under a hunter's moon, following trails taught by Pahayoko, reading broken grass and dew patterns. On the third night, Comanche scouts found her. They recognized Diablo first, then the rider. No arrows flew. Instead, they blindfolded her with a soft doeskin and led her pony by a rope. When the blindfold came off, she stood before the same cottonwood creek, the camp smaller now, teepees patched with canvas scavenged from wagon trains. Tahit waited outside his lodge. He had aged, new lines tracked from eyes to braid, and his left arm hung stiff from an old wound reopened. Nava lay inside on a bed of robes, burning with fever, her breath rattling like dry leaves. The child's eyes, once wary, now fixed on Eliza with desperate trust. Mahi, she whispered, the name a prayer. Eliza worked through the night. She boiled willow bark, spooned quinine between Nava's cracked lips, bathed her forehead with water hauled from the shrinking creek. Tahit sat across the fire, carving a flute from cedar, the notes rising and falling like coyote song. At dawn, Nava's fever broke. The girl slept peacefully, one small hand curled around Eliza's finger. The camp gathered at sunrise. Old women brought pemmican and parched corn. Pahayoko embraced Eliza until her ribs creaked. But the council of warriors waited, faces grim. A white woman returning willingly violated every law of survival. Some argued for her immediate execution as a witch who bewitched Tahit's judgment. Others remembered the winter she kept children alive with her foraging. Tahit stood silent, the flute dangling from his belt. Eliza faced them in the center of the circle, Diablo tethered behind her. She spoke in the Comanche she'd learned stitch by stitch, her voice carrying across the morning chill. I was taken as enemy. I return as sister. The circle broken can be mended, but only if both sides reach. She opened her saddlebag, revealing not just medicine but bolts of calico, needles, thread, gifts for the women who had taught her to survive. Then she did something no one expected. She knelt and pressed her forehead to the ground before Tahit, the gesture of a wife acknowledging her husband before the tribe. A murmur rippled. Tahit's hand rested on her head, not in ownership but benediction. "The circle is whole," he declared. The council dispersed without vote. Some things, even warriors understood, transcended tradition. Winter came early. Eliza stayed. She taught the women to hybridize corn with settler seeds, increasing yield in poor soil. She delivered 3 babies, including Pahayoko's first son, named Harper in secret honor. When army patrols scoured the area, Tahit moved the band into hidden canyons Eliza remembered from her captivity. They became ghosts, surviving where others perished. One night, snow sifted through the smoke hole as Eliza and Tahit sat by the fire. Nava slept between them, her rag doll replaced by one Eliza had sewn from calico scraps. Tahit spoke for the first time of his dead wife, how she had sung to the buffalo to bring them close. "You sing to my daughter's spirit," he said. "The song is different, but the medicine is same." Eliza touched the scar on her shoulder, then the matching one on his ribs where the bullet had grazed the night she fled. "I ran because I was afraid of losing myself," she admitted. "I returned because I found her, in your daughter's smile, in Pahayoko's laughter, in the way you never raised a hand though you had every right." He considered this, then did something that shocked her more than any war cry. He laid his head in her lap like a child. Snow hissed in the fire. Outside, the wind carried the distant howl of wolves, no longer enemies but kin in the vast night. Spring brought the unthinkable. A delegation of Texas Rangers arrived under flag of truce, bearing papers from the territorial governor. The Comanche were offered reservation land in exchange for peace. Many bands refused, choosing war to the death. Tahit listened to the terms, then looked at Eliza. In her eyes, he saw the future, children who would speak 2 languages, who would straddle worlds without breaking. The journey to the reservation took a month. Eliza rode Diablo at the head of the column beside Tahit, Nava perched before her. Behind them stretched 200 souls, their worldly goods packed on travois. At the Red River crossing, Eliza paused. On the far bank stood her aunt, gray-haired now, flanked by settlers who had once cheered her escape. The distance between banks was only 50 yards, but it felt like the span of lifetimes. Her aunt raised a hand. Eliza raised hers in return. No words crossed the water, but understanding did. Some circles, once broken, could never be fully mended, but new ones could form alongside. Years later, travelers on the reservation spoke of a white woman with Comanche braids who ran the schoolhouse, teaching English letters beside quillwork patterns. Her husband, the former war chief, farmed experimental wheat strains that resisted drought. Their daughter, dark-eyed and fair-haired, recited psalms in Comanche and rode like the wind. The wedding gift, Diablo, lived to 30, buried beneath a cottonwood with full honors. His bridle hung in the schoolhouse as reminder, what was taken in violence could be returned in grace. And on quiet evenings, when the prairie wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, Eliza Harper, once captive, now bridge between worlds, would stand on the porch and watch the stars will overhead. She no longer feared the darkness. She had learned that the fiercest hearts often hid the greatest capacity for change, and that love, like water, finds its way through even the hardest stone.